Hello, I'm Eric Hanushek. I'm a senior fellow at the Hoover Institution of Stanford University, and I'm here today with my colleague Terry Moe, professor of political science at Stanford and also a senior fellow at the Hoover Institution. This is actually a very good time to be talking to Terry because after many years of studying teachers' unions, he has come out with the definitive book on teachers' unions. The book, called Special Interest: Teachers' Unions in America's Public Schools, is really the first analytical treatment of teachers' unions and their impacts and policies toward them. Terry, can you talk a little bit about what led you to write this?
Well, I think almost anybody who follows American education knows these days that the teachers' unions are by far the most powerful force in American education. They shape the schools from the bottom up through collective bargaining, where they impose countless, sometimes hundreds, of restrictive work rules on the schools that shape their organization in ways that make it very difficult for them to be effective. And they shape the schools from the top down through politics, where they play very influential roles and use the various checks and balances built into the American political system to block reform. And they've been blocking reform for the last quarter century. And despite their enormous importance in shaping the schools and in sort of understanding how our education system works and why it's been such a disappointment, they've almost never been studied. And I set out to do that in a comprehensive way.
But Terry, if we went back to the times of our parents and our mothers, we saw that there were all kinds of reasons why women were not treated very well and their salaries weren't very good. Don't you think that teachers deserve representation?
Well, I think we have plenty of laws that have accumulated over the years to protect workers of all kinds from the kinds of discrimination that used to happen many decades ago. However, the question of voice, whether teachers should have some kind of representation, whether they should have input, I think is a totally legitimate one. I think it's important for organizations to hear from their workers and to have regular systematic input. It makes them better, more effective organizations. The dilemma that we face as a society is that when workers in schools are organized into powerful unions, the unions use that power to protect jobs and to protect the occupational interests of their members. And therefore, they do things in collective bargaining and in politics that turn out not to be good for children or for effective education. And this is a dilemma that's very real and that we need to do something about.
Well, aren't things changing? I mean, really, when I talk to people about teachers' unions, lots of people suggest that the real answer is reform unionism, where we just get on the same side, the unions and the school reformists and the personnel in the schools, and do the right thing. Don't you think that's really going to change the story from what you've written?
No. And it's just wishful thinking. It's a recognition that, the unions have done a lot of things over the last few decades that are not good for kids. From seniority rules to opposing school choice to opposing accountability. And so the question you have to ask yourself is, why do they do these things? And it's not an accident. They do these things because it's in their interests to do these things. They're in the business of protecting jobs and of protecting the occupational interests of their members. They've always been in that business. Those are their interests, and they will continue to be their interests. The only reason the unions are compromising and making concessions today is that they're up against it like never before. They are very unpopular even among many liberals and moderates who are very critical of the unions for obstructing reform and imposing bizarre forms of organization through collective bargaining. The problem is that many of these same people think if we can just get them to change their behavior, everything will be okay. But that's the flaw.
Terry, this is a pretty discouraging story. Don't you think there's some hope? Where are we going to go?
Well, the obstacle is union power. Union power can't just be overcome by undermining union power, because unions are powerful enough to stop that. So what it takes is some exogenous external force from the outside to break through it all and to undermine union power. And I think that's what's going to happen long term as a result of technology, which is coming whether the unions or anybody else wants it to. This is a huge revolution that's shaping the whole world. It's affecting human interactions of all kinds. It's going to shape the way students learn and schools are organized in the future. And 10 years, 20 years down the road, there's going to be massive online learning. There'll be a huge substitution of technology for labor. Teachers won't be as concentrated in the districts as before. And there will be many more providers and more choice. And all of those things will tend to undermine the power of the unions, and they just won't be able to block reform in the same way.
Terry, I hear echoes of your prior book with John Chubb, Liberating Learning, which I think is very relevant to this topic. And I thank you for taking on this big task of being the first person to look at unions in schools in a very serious way.
Thank you very much.